two slides that were changed.
Was that the all voted yes?
All right. Good evening, Springs BOE. You're live. We're streaming on YouTube, and you may begin.
Great. Thank you very much, LTV. Prior to the start of this meeting, the board was in executive session where we were going over contract negotiations. But at this time, at 7:10, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Vicki, would you take attendance, please?
Sure. In attendance tonight is Barbara Dayton, Eric Fredrickson, Emma Field, Patrick Brabant, and Kate Saris.
Great. Thank you very much. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, budget workshop number 4.
Let's start, Barbara?
What?
I'll start?
Absolutely.
Okay. As I walked into classrooms today, wishing students good luck on the ELA test, I was really reminded of why we're all here. Our students have lost so much over the past few years, and it always takes so much time to restore things like our journalism club. As difficult as this presentation is tonight, this budget provides what our students and staff need and deserve to be successful. On May 21st, registered voters in Spring School will vote on a proposed budget that maintains all academic programs as well as all extracurricular activities, such as the 4th grade opera, the middle school play, sports, clubs such as journalism and robotics. We anticipate not filling the 1 retirement position and reducing 2nd grade from 4 sections to 3 sections as the 1st graders are in 3 sections, so they move up. This budget does not increase staff, but does include positions that are currently not filled, such as the position in the business office and several teaching assistant positions. The 24-25 budget carries a spending increase of $2,480,181 and a tax levy increase of 11.71%. External factors such as the increase in retirement, contributions, health insurance, an increase in salaries to maintain our staff, inflation, are main driving forces this year. Coupled with the phase out of federal and state funds from COVID relief, the district worked diligently to maximize operational efficiencies while working to expand our educational supports to our students and professional development for our staff. Special thanks to Mr. Schneider and Mrs. Carney for stepping up to ensure that we have a budget on time that supports our students. The Board of Education, Building, and District Administration and staff and students are extremely grateful for the generous support the district has received from our family, friends, and community members. We realize that we're asking a great deal of our community this year, but our students are our future. They deserve not only the rigorous academic programs, but the activities that build character and teach lifelong lessons. Our staff work hard each day and every day and deserve a fair compensation. I am a little worried about Assemblyman Thiel retiring. We will honor him in June because for 6 of the 7 years I've been here, he's given us what's called bullet aid. And that bullet aid has really allowed you to spend almost $60,000 on extracurricular activities such as open gym night, intramurals, robotics, chess club, a lot of our supports for our teachers, coordinators, people that go above and beyond. That coupled with the foundation aid cut, which is about $247,000 for Springs, has me concerned. The district maximized the UPK funding, supports 61 UPK children in a 5-hour program. Nancy and I were looking at the data, and our students are doing remarkably well. They get tested when they first get here. They get tested mid-year, and we looked at those results, and they're making outstanding progress. And that will triple into our kindergarten for next year. So we're really pleased with that funding. The archive grant is going really well. If you have a chance to step downstairs, long overdue project, and it will have to be maintained. Once you spend this kind of investment, which was all grant funded, you're going to need a records management person to maintain those files. Our students and staff have been provided a clean and safe environment to learn in, and that needs to be maintained. We've made a big investment in this community, and we need to maintain it. The Board of Ed and the community worked really hard together to secure a new superintendent. And, I'm thrilled that she's a part of this budget presentation. You have a great deal to be proud of here at Spring School. I'm going to ask Nancy and Sam to both present this year's budget.
Thank you so much, Ms. Winter, and I just want to thank the Board of Education and both Ms. Winter for including me in this process. It's been such a gift to be able to be here and be part of this before I start July 1st. I now know exactly what I'll be faced with. I've had a chance to really get to meet and the staff, to learn about the building, to learn about how it's run. So I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's going very well. And I'm really enjoying being here. It's a wonderful place. It's a great school. It's a great community. And I feel like I'm back to my roots, and I'm really happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to the future very much. We always start our slide budget presentations with our mission statement. And as you know, the mission here is that we really educate the whole child. We want to have a really rigorous academic environment. We want to have an environment that provides social, emotional support for kids that need it. And we want to make sure that we're also providing extracurricular activities and different things that kids really like to do to help them become the people that we want them to be, and very caring and giving citizens as they grow up. Okay, so these are just some of the highlights of the budget that are here this year. Last budget presentation, Mr. Kelt, our building principal, was here, and he talked in depth about the science of reading and what that is in the district that we're going to be rolling out. It's something that's going to be mandated by the state as we go forward, and it's a research-based reading initiative that really works with kids pre-K all the way through grade 12 on best practices for making sure that we provide all the instruction we need to help children. As you know, reading, writing, literacy is the most important piece, especially in the early grades. And it's research that's based on science. And it's something that our teachers need some training in. We're going to be working with students in small groups and implementing in each grade level very structured literacy instruction so that we're sure that our kids are going to be where they need to be as they get through the spring school. We also are very proud, as Ms. Winter just mentioned in her introduction, of our extracurricular activities. We have wonderful programs. We saw the robotics presentation that we did last board meeting. I thought the kids were phenomenal, and those are the things that your kids excel in all different areas. And it's really nice to be able to provide them with opportunities to look at what their interests are and where they may go in the future. So we do, as she said, have many clubs that provide opportunities for our students, and it's just as well as athletic programs. So we want to make sure that we keep those things here for our students. Also, our budget is providing, as you all know, we have special education programs that are mandated, and students are recommended for special ed programs based on needs. The Committee on Special Education creates an IEP for those students that qualify, and then as a district, we're required to provide those services. Some in district, sometimes students have to go outside of the district, and that includes things like OT and PT and small group instruction, special testing accommodations, all different pieces that we are required to provide for our students. We also, as you're aware, we have to provide education for our 9 through 12 students that reside in Springs, and we pay tuition to go to East Hampton High School, and that's part of this budget as well. So we're presenting this budget. It's broken down into sections, and I'm just going to talk about what those sections are. And then Mr. Schneider, who we have a shared service with East Hampton for a business official, and he's overseeing the budget as we go forward. And so I will talk about the section of the budget, and then Mr. Schneider is going to talk about the numbers in the following slide. So the first section we talk about is our Board of Education, our central administration, facilities, property insurance, and BOCES administration. And as you're aware, for our Board of Education, we're very thankful. Our board members are volunteers. They do not get paid. Also included in that code is our district clerk. And included in that code is the annual budget vote and expenditures that go with that. You're trying to get me dizzy.
I know. I'm trying to do it quicker. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, yeah, and our central administration, as you're aware, is our superintendent of schools, our business official, our legal counsel, and our auditors. And with those expenses, what has gone up this year is some of our costs for next year for our legal counsel and auditors, which each year, that you do have an increase in those areas. We have our facilities and security. Our custodial and our security guards are included in this area, and then we have our property insurance. We're a member of New York State Schools Insurance Reciprocal, and then we also have BOCES administrative costs, which all the districts that belong to Eastern Suffolk BOCES have to pay in administrative costs for this. So those are the areas that are included in this section of the budget.
All right, so thank you very much. So, as Nancy just said, this is an overview. This is what I call the top lines of the section of the budget. Obviously, the board is going to adopt a line-by-line budget when it meets the next week to adopt the budget, but this gives the highlights here. And what we're trying to do here in these slides is point out some of the particulars. So you can see the increase you have in facilities. There's, including appropriations for cafeteria tables. I know that's a goal. You get the kids out of the classrooms and eating in a central location, and to correct some under budgeting in our security department. I think that this year's budget really didn't take a realistic view of what our security operations cost. So that is what some of the increases are here. But you can see that one of the other areas that are large increases is property insurance. It's not unique to this district. Districts all across the state are facing increased costs for property insurance. It's somewhat non-negotiable because you need to have insurance for the real property you have here, and so that's those costs.
And then the largest portion of our budget, as it should be, is our general instruction. And that's where we have our administration, our building principal, our assistant principal. This is where we have our classroom teachers, their salaries, the materials and support we need for them. This is where we also have the tuition for our general ed students that go to East Hampton High School. This is where we have our appropriation for our textbooks, and also for our BOCES. As being a part of the Eastern Suffolk BOCES, we have an arts and education program that it's very just a wonderful program that we have here in the district that we run through BOCES. And then we also have to provide textbooks to non-public schools, and that's something that we're required to do. And that's all part of the general instruction, and you'll see on the next slide that this is the bulk, as it should be, of the budget. It's the largest portion of the budget.
All right, so again, top line section of the budget here and what we call general classroom instruction. Nancy covered what that means. You can see what the dollar figures are here. I think the district has reasonable increases in terms of what the costs are. Things go up, there's inflationary costs, certain salary increases that we have to budget for. You can see overall, there's a 6% increase. Most of it is attributable to salary increases and tuition costs for your secondary students.
Mandatory salary increases.
That's right.
Next section of the budget that we need to appropriate funds for is our special education, along with some other instructional programs that we have here in the school. And as I mentioned before, with special education, our Committee on Special Education creates individual education plans for our students, which we're required to provide those services that are outlined in that plan. And we have, very fortunately, we have some really wonderful special education programs. We keep a lot of our students in districts because we're able to provide support for them. It's a long way for kids to have to go to BOCES and to get support outside when we live in this geographical area. So we're thankful that we have some great programs here at Springs. Also, we have, as a result of COVID and what happened, all of our students were provided with Chromebooks. So we were able to really get some great software that helps to provide individual instruction for students. So if they're at a certain level, that those software programs help kids to work at that level. And every one of our students has a Chromebook. They're able to take it home and they work on them in the classroom as well. So that's something that we'll continue to support. Other areas of instruction are our support services from our guidance counselors. We have a psychologist, a social worker, we have nurses in the district that all provide that additional support that our students need.
And here is the dollar figures that support that program. Ms. Harris, you mentioned mandatory, non-negotiable. That's particularly what I emphasize in special education. Costs are set. The costs are driven by the program. The program is determined by the Committee on Special Education. So there's just not a lot of maneuverability there. Also included in a special education line is the cost of your secondary students who have special education needs, the cost of educating those students. Most of them go to East Hampton, some of them go to other placements depending on what their needs are. Some go to BOCES, some are in private placements, other public high schools, depending on where their needs are best met.
As Ms. Winter mentioned in her introduction before, some of the things, the extracurricular activities that we really want to keep here that we think are very important for our students are our clubs and our athletic program. As you see, we offer 5 clubs here, journalism, diversity, chess, Lego, robotics, our video club, and our interscholastic athletics, which we provide for our 7th, 8th grade students. We have some here. We share some teams with East Hampton as well. And we also have intramurals, which is really nice, both in the fall and the spring for our students in grades 3 through 6. And it is a wonderful opportunity for our kids to have after-school activities to do once the school day ends.
Financial impact there, modest increase. The money goes to support the student activities. Dollars well spent.
Transportation, we do have 19 buses here in the district. We provide transportation for all of our students here in Springs. We provide transportation for them to attend East Hampton High School, for all the field trips that our students are able to take. Fortunately, our PTA is very active and they help provide some additional educational experiences for our students. We also are required to transport students to private schools, Hayground and Ross School, which are within our area.
Transportation is a great example for something that sort of touches on a topic that's been brought up in terms of the effort to consolidate districts. Consolidation is a tough nut to crack, but in transportation, as a great example, you are doing shared services to save your taxpayers money to accomplish the same mission. So what you have started this year is that the maintenance on your vehicles, on your buses, is being done by East Hampton School District, which has a transportation garage that's capable of handling the flow of your vehicles. So you're saving money because you're not sending your vehicles up island, which require the time of 2 drivers to drive one vehicle and a secondary vehicle all the way up to East Patchogue, where you were having them repaired. You are saving money because East Hampton is not making a profit on that work. It's a government agency, so you're saving money on the work, and the work is staying locally. So that's a great example of where shared services are helping to save your taxpayers money and operate your district more efficiently. You can see what the transportation budget is there, but it's I think the best example that I can give you in terms of how you may not be able to achieve consolidation if that's something that people are interested in, but by sharing services, you're saving money and doing things more efficiently.
This is an area we have one of our greatest increases, and that's retirement, health insurance, and other benefits. And these are all mandated areas and we have significant increases, particularly in health insurance. Retirement is for what we have to give into the current teachers that are working to the retirement system, and also what it costs for our retirees. We have other benefits that cost our unemployment benefits, our workers' comp benefits, and there's increases in all those areas, as Mr. Schneider will show you on the next slide.
All right, so let's talk about how the retirement system works for a minute, and I think that will provide some education. So the retirement systems are mandatory for public employees to participate in. The employer is required to pay a percentage, a contribution rate, based on the employee's salary into the system. The system is run by the state. It's guaranteed by the state constitution to be funded to 104% of its liability. The fund is one of the largest investment funds in the country, one of the largest investment funds in the world. They are professional money managers who take these billions of dollars and invest them. But when they come up short for what they have to achieve at 104% of the liability, the employers and the employees have to contribute to make up that difference. That's where the contribution rate is set. So the systems, there's a system for teachers and administrators and a separate system for civil service employees, set a contribution rate, which is key to whatever the individual employee's salary is. The contribution rate, particularly for ERS, for the employees, that's the civil service employees, is going up next year. And for every percentage point, for every 10th of a percentage point it increases, you have to pay more into that contribution. You can see what the increases are here. Health insurance is another area that is out of your control in terms of the costs. The costs are determined. You participate here in the New York State Employee Health Plan, NYSHIP, and so the rates are set through the New York State Department of Civil Service in Albany. It's a complicated negotiation, but essentially what has to happen is that they have rates. It's the raw share cost. Raw share is for about $40,000. You saw on the previous slide for family coverage, and about $17,000 for single. Now, each employee who works here pays a portion of that. That rate is that whatever they pay there is determined by the contract that they're employed under, but the costs are going up exponentially. In the last 25 years, the cost of health insurance has gone up more than 510%. And so last year alone, active employee family coverage went up about 9%, and retiree health insurance that covered a separate portion of the plan went up 24.9%. So you can see that's where the increases are coming from. We don't get a say in that rate. We just are told what the cost is, and that's what we have to contribute. But it's a statewide plan. The risk is shared amongst all the participating government agencies and the state government across the state, but that's how the costs are arrived at. Okay.
Then we also, the next section, we have our district debt and interfund transfers. And district debt is what we incur, what we incurred through serial bonds for our construction, when we had the new expansion of the schools, which we have to pay back. Each year, the district has a tax anticipation note, which is money that we need to borrow in the fall to make sure we have our cash flow for operating the district until we are able to collect our tax remittance. And our bond anticipation notes were issued for the purchase of buses, and we're repaying the interest on those notes now. And we also have interfund transfers, and this is just money that's in the general fund that needs to be appropriated to the milk fund, the federal fund, and the capital reserve. And you'll see where this actually goes down for the capital reserve because we're not appropriating as much money as we have in the past.
All right, so you see what the numbers are there. Let's talk about one of the two variances. So the large increase is for the tax anticipation note. As Nancy says, the district's primary source of revenue is property tax. Property taxes are sent to the district from the town in basically more or less two chunks, one in January, one in May, which effectively means between June and December, you have no revenue coming in, or functionally no revenue coming in. You need money in order to be able to pay your bills, pay your employees. So you have to borrow in anticipation of receiving the taxes, hence the name. The cost is going up because last year you didn't borrow enough. And as a result, the district wasn't able to make timely payments to its vendors that it needed to make. So you need to increase your appropriation for the interest because you have to borrow more, which is, of course, a natural course of prices go up. As things get more expensive, as the budget gets bigger, you have to borrow more. You have a modest tax anticipation note compared to other districts, but maybe a little too modest. So we need to increase that for next year so that you're not stuck with no operating cash to be able to pay your expenses. All the money gets repaid from where it's borrowed, plus interest, when the tax money becomes available in the spring. The other variance here is we see a decrease in interfund transfers. So as Nancy said, Interfund transfers is money that you collect through taxes in the general fund. It goes to support three main programs. The first is the extended school year special education program. The bulk of the cost is eventually covered through an appropriation from the state, but you have to front the money. So and it goes to the federal fund, so you have to appropriate money that gets transferred to the federal fund to cover that extended school year program for students who are mandated by the CSE to participate in that. The second is the milk fund. Yes, you sell the milk, you get reimbursements from the state, but it's not enough to cover the expenses of operating the fund. The fund cannot operate on a deficit, so you have to use general fund money to prop up the difference. The third is, in the past, the district has appropriated money from the general fund to put into the capital reserve as a way for saving for capital reserve projects in the future. We're recommending that you don't do that this year because, first of all, I think the capital reserve is fairly well funded. I'm not certain that we have pressing capital need that we need to immediately identify and save money for. And given the increase in the tax, this is a way, one of the few things that you have discretion over in the budget that you can tamp down on the expense and help control the increase in the levy. So for this year, we're recommending no appropriation into the capital reserve. That may change in the future, but let's take that out of the budget this year to help save some money. All right, so this is the summary of what we just talked about. It's all put together on one slide. You can see where we are. Obviously, it's a 6.8% increase. It's obviously a little higher than I think that ideally we'd like to be at. This is the budget increase, but this is the realistic cost of what it costs to operate your program for next year. That's sort of self-explanatory based on what we've just talked about. But if we move on to the next slide. Keep going. Let's shift over to the revenue side of things. We just talked a lot about the expenditure side of things. Good, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about the revenue side of things, beginning with the property tax cap. We are now in year 14, I think, of the property tax cap law. This shows how you calculate the property tax cap. It's a formula set by the state. The allowable levy, what you could have raised the levy by without, quote unquote, piercing the tax cap, is $725,000. But we saw from our budget to budget increase a few minutes ago that you're well in excess of the $725,000 just to preserve the exact program that you have. As Deb said, you're not adding anything. In fact, you're subtracting some things. You're not filling a retiree position. But just to maintain what you got, you will be well in excess of what you are permitted to increase the levy by without piercing the cap. So in order to maintain what you have, piercing the cap is the only way forward here. Move forward. So this is the revenue budget. A couple of caveats here. The state aid is, I'm using as the state aid number what the governor's proposal is because it is the only number that we have that's firm at the moment. We are told anecdotally that the legislature is going to increase that appropriation when they finally get around to passing the budget. The budget was due April 1st. We are on April 9th, and they have not done it yet. They just passed another budget extender, which means they're essentially punting down the field probably until at least next week. At this point, we're kind of out of time here. So we're going to go with, I think we have to go with this revenue budget. You set the levy officially. The voters vote on the expenditure budget in May. The levy is set by the board in the fall. Let's pretend we got more money from the state legislature when they adopt their budget. You could use that to lower the tax levy when you set it in the fall. That's a decision and a conversation we can have in September and October, or you can have in September, October, about what you want to do. But I think we kind of have to go with this spending plan for now because we don't have any other firm numbers and it's too risky. It's a big risk to assume that the money's going to come back. We don't have that luxury. So you can see that's what our spending plan is. It requires a levy increase of 11.71%. So what does that mean in terms of the property tax impact on the homeowner? I want to emphasize, as this slide earthquakes into view here, is that this is an estimate, and this is an estimate that relies on several assumptions, which I will tell you right off the bat, none of which are going to happen. The first is that the assessed value, the total assessed value of the district doesn't change. That's the only way to do this calculation, but it does. We know it does. The Board of Assessors, led by Jeannie Nielsen, is coming up with a new assessed value in the next couple of days. But in order to make this comparison, we're just going to assume things are constant because there's no other realistic way to do this. The other assumption here is that an individual homeowner's property value doesn't change, which may not happen. If you add to your house or you subtract from your house, your assessed value will change. But if we understand those two assumptions, the increase that we have for what we're going to call an average assessed home in this district, which has an assessed value of $3,500. That's not market value. Market value, street value, what you sell your home for, we're going to assume an average would be $1 million, okay? And again, we're using broad generalities here. $1 million of market value, street value, gives you an assessed value of $3,500, which pays about $5,900 a year in property tax. So an 11.71% increase adds $691, or about $58 a month to that home. That's what it carries. Again, several assumptions there. Individual property owners who are curious about their individual property should contact the Board of Assessors for more specific information. I'm giving you general information. Only the Board of Assessors can determine final information. Because again, we set the levy, not the rate, which I think leads into our next slide. So let's talk about tax levy, assessed valuation, and tax rate. These are terms that are used interchangeably, but they mean very different things. And I thought it might be a good opportunity for the board to have a public discussion about what these things mean. Let's talk about them. So the tax levy is the amount of money that you have to raise from the property owners in the district to fund your operations after you subtract out other sources of revenue, primarily which are state aid. Okay? The assessed valuation is the value of the land in the district, and that is set by the town board of assessors. It is not set by you. The only part that you determine in all this that we're going to talk about in the next two slides is the tax levy. So the assessed valuation is the worth of the property. The total assessed valuation is all those properties added together. Market value is not the same as assessed value in the town of East Hampton. There are some towns in the state that do 100% equal valuation. East Hampton is not one of them, which is why you can have $1 million home with an assessed valuation of $3,500. Okay? The way the tax rate is calculated is you take the total tax levy that is needed to be raised in taxes, divided by the total assessed valuation, multiply it by 1,000, and that's the tax rate per 1,000. And we're going to talk about what I like to term here as shares in the corporation. When a corporation makes a profit and they give out the dividend you get is relative to the number of shares you own in that corporation. I think that's a generally understood principle. That's how tax rate works. The value of your property on the basis of how many shares of that 1,000 that you have is how tax rate is calculated. So if we move on to the next slide, if we understand that, I want to tell you why comparing tax rates between districts is not a very good comparison. In fact, it is an invalid comparison. So I'm going to call it the tale of two cities here, okay? With a nod to the novel. So let's pretend we have two school districts here, and each of them has a tax levy they have to collect of $1 million. And each of these districts, are going to make it easy, has 10 properties. We're just making this very basic for understanding purposes. In District 1, each property, the 10 properties are each worth $100,000 each. So how do we calculate the tax rate for District 1? We take the $1 million we need to raise in the levy, we divide it by the $1 million total assessed valuation, multiply it by 1,000, and we get 1,000, which means that each property pays $1,000 per 1,000 of value. So each home is worth $100,000, which means they own 100 units of those per 1,000 of value. So they pay $100,000 a year in property tax each, and the tax rate is $1,000. Okay? You compare that to District 2. Again, we're collecting $1 million in levy, but the total assessed valuation is $2 million. We do our calculation. Now we have a tax rate of $500. So if you're looking at rate to rate, you say, oh, that rate is lower. But again, now we have to look at how many shares in that corporation do you have. It turns out you pay the same $100,000, which is why comparing rate to rate is a bad idea. Because when you compare fractions, it's only a valid comparison if one of the numbers doesn't move. If both of them move, you now are not comparing like items. So in our instance here, because in our instance, it kind of works because the levy is the same, so you can make that comparison. But in real life, it doesn't. because our levy here in Springs is different than the levy in East Hampton, is different than the levy in Waynescott, is different than the levy in Smithtown, is different than any other levy, and our assessed valuation is also different. So when you switch both the numerator and the denominator in a comparison, you have an invalid comparison. So the Tale of Two Cities, I think, explains how the difference between those three important terms, tax levy, assessed valuation, tax rate. All right? I think we can move on.
Okay, so now as we're getting to the end of the presentation, we talk about what happens if the budget doesn't pass. And before I say anything, I just want to thank Mr. Sam Schneider and the East Hampton School District for sharing services with us. Sam talked about shared services before and how it benefits the taxpayers in Springs. And we're very thankful for having those shared services. I think it's a way going forward that we're going to be able to definitely save money for our taxpayers. And we have three options if the budget doesn't pass. And the first option, you get to put the budget up one more time, which would be in June, and we can put up the exact same budget that we have now and try to get support for that budget if it went down the first time. The second option is to look to work with the board, to work with your staff here and say, okay, what programs are we going to cut? What staff members do we have to do without? And to reduce the budget to whatever percent you'd want to get at, we have to figure out what we're going to cut from the budget. And the last option is if the budget failed again, or if the district decided they didn't want to go for the second vote, is to go right to a contingent budget, which is the exact budget that we have this year that you can't add anything to. And that is going to really be devastating for our district. We would have to cut over $4 million, $4.159 million from our current budget. And it would obviously be very devastating to all of our programs, to our staff. So we're hoping we don't have to go in that direction. And we really worked hard to make sure Ms. Winters and the prior staff here worked hard to present a budget that supported all the things that we hold dear as a district here in Springs, and making sure that we are able to provide our students with what they deserve. And these are just the last important dates that we have. Our budget and property tax card adoption is April 16th, which is next week, where we adopt our budget. And then we have our budget hearing on May 7th, where we take comments from both the board and the community. And then we have our annual meeting and budget vote and board trustee elections on May 21st, 2024. So that's where we're at this time. And once again, we thank the Board of Education, thank Ms. Winter, and thank Mr. Schneider for all the work they put into the budget.
All right, thank you very much. That was a very thorough presentation. Great teamwork. We really appreciate that. And it's certainly a hard number for us to look at, but we know that this is actually the reality of our current financial situation. And that in the last few years, we have been softening the blow as much as possible for our constituents because of the situation that we found ourselves in ever since COVID, and probably, using more of our reserves to offset the budget than we should, and making sure that we're not asking for the maximum ask. But then when push comes to shove, the can gets kicked only so far. And, I think we're all very aware that it is in our school's best interest to have these funds available. And this is not something we would be asking if we didn't think this. Mm-hmm. So I did just have one question, not like I'm trying to add to this budget, but in the transportation section, we have a dollar change of only $3,000. So is that an adequate enough increase for looking at fuel expenses, or is the offset cost from the previous budget that we're saving in terms of going to East Hampton, does that allow some cushion in there for?
I think we're going to make it work with what we have. I really think at this point in the calendar, it's not advisable to make too many changes. I think we will figure out how to make it work with the appropriation we have. And I'm hopeful that with some shared services and some other approaches to how things are done, that we can make the appropriation work.
Any questions from the board right now?
I just wanted, it was a nice presentation. It was very easy to follow,
Yeah.
which makes it a little bit easier. So it's not just looking at numbers, explaining what each number was. I don't know how to swallow, but it's the reality of it. I did have a question about high school, just to go over that. I'm glad that you brought up that we educate 9th through 12th grade, because a lot of people do forget that we have 85 high school
Right.
students in Springs. You know, I saw it was a budget increase of almost $9,900,000. That was because we have continuing more students going up there?
No, Deb, how many students do we have coming up?
The difference is substantial.
Yeah,
We have,
substantial.
we have 72 going up and 105 12th graders, but you have to remember that in addition to special ed children who are allowed to stay till the age of 22, general education students are allowed to stay till they're 21 or receive a diploma. So out of the 105 that we anticipate graduating, we're not sure all of them will graduate.
I'm just saying, I don't like percentages, because percentages don't, dollar amounts don't mean what they are. You know, and I looked at almost $1 million increase in high school tuition.
I think you can also say, and granted, I see this on both sides of the money here, but it's an area it's another area we talked about which you have no control. So you have to build in some flexibility in the budget here, because students, you have a hard number of what exists today, but what exists today may not be what exists in September. And so you're going to have to build a little flexibility into your budget, because you're going to have to educate those students. And if you have an increase and you don't have any flexibility in your budget, something else has to be cut in order. It's not like you can turn the kids away. So I think having some maneuverability in that line is an advisable thing to do. And I do this on the opposite side of things when I'm projecting the revenue costs of what East Hampton receives from sending districts. I have to do it the opposite way. I know what's coming, but I have to kind of assume that what if they didn't come? And so I have to lower the revenue expectations so there's flexibility on both ends.
One of our greatest concerns as a district, as you know, we're a district susceptible to fiscal distress. And our unappropriated fund balance is only at 0.25%, which is dangerously low. So we don't have any place to go if we have if we have more students go into the high school, if we have special education students that come into the district that need services. It's one of our greatest concerns. So we want to make sure that we do have money in the budget to support any of these situations that may arise.
Yeah, and actually Sam's bringing that particular situation to our attention when we were talking one time of the school district that had an extreme special needs student come in for a residential placement. It was $300,000 for a year for that one student. And we could, if that happened to us right now, we would, where do you make up $300,000?
Wipe out our unappropriated fund balance completely.
Which we don't have.
Yeah.
It would require, since you don't have an appropriate fund balance to speak of, it would require reductions in other areas of the budget, as I said a moment ago, because that's one of these expenses that's non-negotiable. So you would have to go in and find the things that make this district special, the extras, the arts and education, that sort of stuff that makes people attracted to want to send their students here, and you'd have to cut the optionals in order to afford the requireds. And that's not something that I think that superintendents or the Board of Education ever want to find themselves in a position to do. So that's why I think flexibility and some understanding of contingency expenses, I don't mean contingent budget, but I mean unrealized, as yet undefined things need to be built into your budget.
But it's really not just the extras that will have to be cut. We have to go to a contingent budget and cut $4 million.
Right, that's a separate thing. If we're talking, and I say I want to use that. I don't mean to use that word contingent as contingency budget, but yes, if you were to have a budget that's not adopted and you have to cut $4 million, it's no easy way to say this. It will devastate your program, period.
Right, because clubs and athletics in this chart
No,
is
it's
$344,000.
staffing programs that you would
And
have
class
to cut.
sizes
Yes,
and
class
report
sizes
school
would go up.
programs and
And
after
it
school
will take you
programs.
a decade to
drop-off.
put your program back together, and it's just not an advisable position to put your students in. I will quote from Adam Fine, superintendent of East Hampton, who said, these are students who are just coming out of the COVID pandemic. It's not the time to be removing things from them because they just survived that really, life-changing, particularly for a young person, experience. Having to be on a contingent budget will devastate this program in this school and its standing in this community in terms of what it can offer the students and the community at large.
Certainly increasing class sizes would be devastating given the learning deficiencies that we're having based on COVID.
Sam, out of the $4.1 million that the cut of contingency, what amount that is required to pay? You know what I'm saying? There's a contract, a contract that has to be paid.
Well, I mean, required to pay can be defined in a number of different ways. Obviously, you employ a teacher, there's a required cost of that. But there is a requirement that you employ a certain number of teachers. So I think that the only way I can really answer your question is the only things that are absolutely mandated to pay in your budget are the debt that you've issued and your contribution to the BOCES administration costs. Everything else is dependent on how many people you employ here and what programs you offer. Those two things are the only things that aren't affected. So you need to, in order to get to that number, if the voters were to turn the budget down, you would have to look at everything. I mean, everything extra that's not absolutely mandated would have to go. And then, as Ms. Sarah said, you're going to increase class sizes. You're going to lay off a number of staff members because there's just no other way to get there. And it would be very difficult. I'm sure that this district, like many others, particularly in East End, South Fork, it's hard to find and retain quality educators because of the challenges of coming out here on a daily basis. If you add yourself to the list of districts that can't offer a stable home for teachers, people aren't going to want to come even more, and that's not a good position to be in either. I recognize that the increase is quite large. Obviously, that's a
Concern for
it's a
all
concern
of us.
for all. It's a concern for me as a financial official. I don't like to see numbers as large as that, but the board is making. The board has led the direction of we want to preserve the program you have. This is what's going to cost.
And you know that some of our neighboring districts that have an actual large commercial tax base to help are also raising their levy because of all of the same issues that are going on here. So I know both East Hampton and Amagansett are increasing their levies by significant amounts, and they have a lot more commercial industry to help with their tax levy base. So
Right, which I know is so hard for our taxpayers to see, certainly, and we have really done our best to be very mindful of this over the last few years. But there comes a point where you have to say what something actually costs, especially to maintain something, especially when we've had people here thinking, why are staff leaving? Why aren't you paying people enough? If you want to do that, it takes a certain amount of money, and I again appreciate all the hard work you put into this and really looking at, especially Sam. The presentation reads really well, and it's a little different from what other presentations people are used to. And so I know you've had a lot of work getting into this, so thank you. But it's a very concise presentation, hopefully very helpful to people looking to understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on with this budget. So thank you. Any questions? Okay. So at this time, we will open up the meeting to public commentary. Please come to the podium and state your name, and please be mindful of the time that you're using up. We usually allow for about 3 minutes, so if you could be concise, that would be greatly appreciated. So if somebody would care to come up, looks like, yes. And LTV, if anybody's calling in, would you please give us a heads up?
We have no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I've been watching your website and the agenda in anticipation of tonight's meeting so that I'll get a heads up on the presentation. It looks like the business administrator has added a couple of pages at the last minute dealing with the issue of understanding tax rates, and they weren't there a day or two ago. I'll have to digest those because frankly, I do believe that comparing tax rates from one district within the town to another is very valid, and unfortunately it puts us in a very bad light. But we only have to deal with our district in the budgeting process, so I won't belabor that. I do want to point out that there are a couple of inconsistencies. If you take a look at your property tax cap calculation, the amount stated for the prior school year tax levy does not match what you are stating to be the tax levy from last year on your revenue budget page. So there is a discrepancy there of about $400,000 that needs to be explained. In other words, if the actual prior school tax levy and the amount that appears on your property tax cap calculation page does match the property tax report card, so I believe that that is accurate. If that's the case, then you are actually increasing the tax levy by more than what you are calculating. Also, I know that in the course of the different budget presentations, there was at one time there was an enrollment spreadsheet showing your anticipated enrollment next year. And I don't believe that has changed. I don't think you've made any changes in the assumptions. And basically, the most significant factor there is that you have an anticipated reduction of about 25 students at the high school. This is a big reduction in tuition expenditure. And yet, your tuition expenditure number has increased substantially, much more so than the increase in the rate imposed by the East Hampton School District. So I'm not quite understanding that. And after I sit down, I'd appreciate if you could clarify why the tuition expenditure is increasing so much in view of the fact that we're anticipating a substantial decrease in the number of tuition students. Also, I think that the calculations of the impact on a homeowner or a taxpayer of this budget, if it passes as currently constituted, I think those assumptions are really, some of them are just erroneous. If you look at the total amount of taxable assessed value in the Spring School District, and you look at either the number of parcels or if you just know from anecdotal information, the average residential property assessment is higher than 3,500. It's higher than $1 million of estimated true value. So that means that the average impact on the property owner is going to be greater than what you are stating here in the budget materials. And that's really what I have to say right now, other than just the general content, something that I'm going to tell you something you already know. Last year, you had a budget expenditure increase of about 7.65%. This year, if I understand correctly, you're proposing and expecting to have to impose an overall expenditure increase of 6.8%. Last year, you had a school tax levy amount increase of 5.15%, and this year you're anticipating at least 11%. That's a lot of increase. Yes, life is getting more expensive, and there are a lot of expenses that you have no control over, but it's going to be a hard sell for the taxpayers. And we may have reached the point where maintaining all of your programs and all of your staff is just not viable and necessary in the minds of the people who have to fund your budget. And of course, you'll find out on budget election day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buda. You're absolutely right. And this is a decision that comes down to our community. And the 5 members of this community, those of you were, from different social groups, we basically don't have connections outside of this. We're 5 independent people who agree that this is actually what our community needs. And right now, none of us is prepared to make cuts to this budget to make it more palatable. This is the best thing that we can do for our school for these funds, and our community is going to have to tell us if they value that or not. If our community says we don't value that, we really can't handle this financially, then we go to plan B. But it's not going to look pretty for the school, and it's really not going to be good for our kids. It's
or for the community as an extension.
Nor for the community as an extension of that. So, we have to have some additional funds in there for our college tuition. We never know what our student count is going to be. We have to have a buffer built in there for that. We have to have a buffer built in for the high school tuition. for actually for any kind of tuition. We do not have enough buffer in our budget right now for any big significant increase in tuition, and that would be a problem. So we need to get our district into good financial shape. We need to have the reserves that we need. We need to maintain what we have. And we need to not be making an ask like this every year, because if we, we have to ask for a small amount this year, next year it's going to be back to the same thing, trying to be where we are. So we're trying to have our school on the best footing, and we need our community to, say they agree with us or they don't. So thank you.
Just to add
it looks
a little
like.
Sorry, Barbara, I just wanted to add that we're talking about serious cuts.
Yes.
This is just a budget increase to maintain the programs that we have and the class sizes that we have. Anything less than this is going to be very detrimental to the school district, to the students, to our staff.
Right.
This is a serious situation.
Right.
It's not just about cutting art and sports.
Well, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to take some of the points that were raised because I think that they're interesting points. So let's just look at the numbers here. Because yes, last year I'm going to assume you're right that you increased your budget by 7.65%, which is obviously more than what we're looking for this year. But the reason why your levy increase has to be more this year is we have to assume that there's a fall off in state aid, which, as we talked about in the presentation, may actually not come to pass. But we don't know, and we have to just go with the number we have. When it's time to set down the levy in the fall, we will obviously know the state at that point, and the board can revisit that discussion. I realize that it is asking the voters to have a leap of faith, but unfortunately, this is the system that has been imposed upon us. The timing of all of this is not ideal, right? You ask the voters to approve the budget, where this legislature has not approved the state aid number, and then you set the levy in the fall. It puts things in the wrong logical order. You make that number equal to what the state is, now your levy increase is not as stark as it currently is. In terms of the assessed valuation, I think that the slide is fairly clear that it is an average example. And I said I said on several occasions, if an individual homeowner's property has evaluations higher, lower, talk to the Board of Assessors. The only role that you have as the school district's Board of Education is to set the levy. You do not determine the value of properties. You do not set the rate. So property owners should talk to the Board of Assessors to determine how things are going to impact them. It's very hard to say exactly what an average home is worth here, because as Jeannie Nielsen will tell you, there hasn't been a town-wide reassessment in decades. So even people living in two equally built homes may have different assessed values because of the limitations of when that assessed value is set. And without going into a lengthy discourse about how assessed valuation works, unless you're making a material change to your house, the town has not reassessed you. So it's very difficult to say what the average assessment is. This number that I have here was not pulled out of thin air. It was selected in a conversation with Jeannie Nielsen, who has been an elected assessor in this town forever. And this is showing what many homeowners encounter. I encourage property owners to call them to find out specific information. I recognize that there is a difference in the property tax cap numbers that are on the state website and what we're talking about now. I can't speak to what was calculated here in the past. I can tell you with what I'm looking at the moment. I have read last year's budget newsletter and I see that there's a variance. I can't explain it. I am not your auditor. I'm trying to draw a line in what has happened in the past and move forward from what I have in front of me. This is the best information that I can speak to at the moment. And finally, the last point I just want to make is in terms of the tuition. The tuition number is not imposed upon you by East Hampton School District. The voters of this community approved a contract for education of students in grades 9 through 12 with the rate clearly built into the ballot initiative. The voters chose to approve that 5-year deal. It's subject to negotiation between the boards and the administrators of the various districts, and then it's subject to voter permission, voter approval. It's not imposed by the district, it's agreed by East Hampton. It's agreed upon by the taxpayers, the voters of this community. Those are the points I think that were raised that need further discussion. All right.
Thank you.
Christy Lamanda. Thank you for explaining that very well. Nancy and Sam, that was great. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants, a big increase. But I think it's really important for everyone to hear that this is not frivolous spending, that this is really just to maintain the basics that we have. And the other point, which I know you guys are very well versed in, but for anybody who's watching, needs to hear it again. Springs made a conscious decision years ago not to have a business district. And that leaves a different pool to get the money from. So yes, I understand the difficulties of being a homeowner in Springs. My family has been in Springs for generations, but that's not the school's fault. The fact that there is not a larger pool of commercial properties to pull the money from, it has nothing to do with the school. And that was, decisions made outside of our purview. So we really do hope that everyone listening looks at all of the situations and considers that this bill has just come due. Yes, we've tried, for years, the board has tried to soften the blow, as Barbara had said, with using some of the money from the fund balance. And that got us into another situation. The time is now. We have to put this investment in our children and in our community.
Thank you, Christy. And we also have to put this time for investment in our staff too. We need to do right by our staff to make sure they want to keep working here. And so we don't have issues of, people feeling not valued, because we value our staff very highly. Is there somebody else here or calling in on LTV that would like to address the budget at this time?
Dermot Quinn, East Hampton resident, 2 kids at Spring School. Just very quickly, if there's any cutbacks that have to be made, if we lose a teacher, we're never getting them back. And that's the long and short of it. So, thank you.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. So,
Summer Romeo, Springs parent. If it were to fail and we'd have to go on a contingency budget, could we even open our doors? It's not realistic. You would cut every sport, every intramural, every club, half the teachers. You couldn't open your doors. There's not enough to cut. I mean, have we ticked it off the list?
As Sam mentioned, it would be devastating to the school and to the program, and ultimately to the community at large.
Yeah, I just don't know where you find $4 million.
You have to make the cuts, and you have to operate without that staff and without those programs. But it would be devastating.
Kindergarten's not a mandated grade, right? Is that something that we would have to consider?
You would have to consider it, yes. We'd have to put everything on the table, and that'd be a lot of discussions for the board and the administration.
well, I mean, at less than this percentage, there would have to be cuts.
6.7 million in salaries, instructional salaries, and you'd have to literally cut your staff and everything in half to be able to get to 4 million.
So if it doesn't pass at this percentage, then the thing is, all right, do we cut what do we cut then? There would still be cuts even without going into a contingency budget. That would be, very, very tough to swallow. It'd be very hard on our kids, honestly.
Well, I think that with the budget we presented, though, it's the most futuristic budget we need to carry this school forward and not hold the taxpayers every year. We'll keep on increasing. And actually, it's holding the school in hostage of what some of the community members don't want of a school district. And as a board member, I feel uncomfortable with that. I think if we put this out as a one-time shot, listen, you gotta trust us. We've been able a long time, school's been able a long time. We all are community members, we all own homes here.
And that's one of the goals is to really even things out so that we don't have these continual spikes going forward, so that we have a budget that really fits our expenditures and what we need to keep our programs, to keep our staff, and then level out. And I said as you spoke about in the past, we haven't created a budget that really fits our program.
Well, the cut to state aid has really exacerbated the situation for us. It wouldn't be nearly as
Yeah,
Yes, it
and
is.
we can be hopeful that some will be
Yeah.
restored. We'll see.
I've never
What happens?
understood the whole tax cap concept of 2% or the, what do you call it? The
You have-
cost of increase, whichever is less. I mean, that actually does not make sense. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Look, the law is well intentioned, but I think that there are potential criticisms to it
Yes.
because it does not include, they include some exemptions, capital costs, right? We talked about how the issuance of debt is non-negotiable. You must repay your debt. And there are exemptions for the mandatory contributions to the retirement system when those contributions fluctuate by more than 2%, which is happening this year. So there's a slight exemption amount, but it doesn't include things like health insurance exemptions. When the cost of health insurance is going up 10% a year, and you're only able to increase the revenue by 2% a year, obviously you will never keep up.
No.
And so that's, where I think that there are valid criticisms on both sides of the thought of whether the formula needs reformation. Obviously, will have to be a decision reached in Albany.
Right. Not by us.
With the Pierce, path, you're gonna have to get 60% of your voters to approve the budget.
Right, yes, 60%,
60.
yes.
And one of the reasons we're on that list, not only is, our fund balance, but also the fact that we didn't pass our budget by a supermajority. So the comptroller has his eyes on spring school for many of those reasons.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you, those in attendance, LTV, doing a last check-in with you, see if anybody's there.
We have no
And
callers
no.
at this time.
Okey-doke. Well, thank you very much. So it looks like our next meeting will be on April 16th for the budget and property tax card adoption. We will see you then. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Interesting.